Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we were reading Swamp Thing number 160, and just a little catch-up on what's been going on. In the last issue, we had a fun little one-off about a boy who lived in a town in Europe where rich people who belonged to this exclusive club that specifically focused on eating things they've never eaten before first ate the boy's dog and then moved on to the boy himself. And a piece of Swamp Thing actually came alive with the spirit of the boy's dog who helped protect him from those men. And even though that story was pretty fun, Swamp Thing didn't really show up in it. So what happened with him in the arc that preceded that issue was that Swamp Thing is now the new champion of the waves, or of water. So he is now the champion of 3 different parliaments: the Parliament of the Trees, the Parliament of the Stone, and the Parliament of the Waves. And we haven't seen him yet, but he should be having some kind of water powers now that he is the champion of water. And it seems like that's what this issue is going to be about, because the cover of issue 160 of Swamp Thing is of Swamp Thing, but he's completely made of water. We see inside of his body as he walks through the woods. There's fish and tadpoles and stuff living inside of him, but all of his body is completely made of water in the same shape as he normally is when he's just a plant. And we also see on this cover that this is written by Mark Miller with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMulder. And as we turn to the first page, we get some panels of a very bright and busy city, and also of what looks like a barbarian and a hobbit. And they look very out of place as they try to hide themselves in the alleys of this city. And over these panels, the narration says, "Light bulbs dim in old Manhattan. TV sets flicker with garbled interference. Wind-up clocks stop dead. The signs are unmistakable. They're here." And we see the little hobbit guy kind of peek out to look at the city streets from the alley, and the narration continues saying, "Adjusting his eyes to the limited spectrum of our world, Boz squints at Eric. It is so loud and sick. Not at all what he expected. Could this really be the place Jim Rook described with such affection? Initially, Boz is afraid to leave the shadows, but Tark holds his hand and promises to keep him safe. Their home world will surely die if they don't locate the Nightmaster. Failure is not an option." And I should fully describe these guys right here. We got the barbarian, who's named Tark, who of course has nothing on except an animal fur Speedo, but also he has a ton of body hair. So from his legs up to his shoulders, he looks like he's wearing some kind of fur suit, but that's all just his body hair. And his companion, who is a halfling or a hobbit, is named Boz. He's your classic halfling who's wearing a green cloak, and we can't really see any of his clothes under that. Oh, and I should also say that Tark is wearing a helmet with ram's horns on either side. So as Boz gets emboldened to come out finally, both walk immediately into the street because they apparently don't know what a city is. And immediately they are blinded by lights of a truck that is coming towards them, and the narration says, "The lights come from nowhere. 1 hour from now, Boz will be crying in the rain outside a hospital, and he'll realize this was the moment it all went wrong." Tark the Barbarian unsheathes his sword and prepares to battle his first 18-wheeler. So as he does this, he also pushes Boz out of the way, so Boz does not get hit by this truck, and Tark yells out, "Stand aside, Boz. This bright-eyed beast has made an unfortunate choice for supper tonight." Then we get to the driver inside of the truck, and he's all shocked because someone's standing in front of him all of a sudden, and the narration says, "The driver hits his horn twice and turns the wheel around 360 degrees, pulling a muscle in his left shoulder. He slams on the brakes, but it's too late." And we see the truck strike Tark, breaking Tark's sword and throwing his helmet aside, and Tark's body landing in the street, not moving. And the narration says, "Tark's head opens up all over the road." And the driver comes out of the cab of his stopped truck and he yells, "Shit, did I hit him?" And Boz is standing next to Tark's body, holding his helmet, and he's saying to Tark, "Get up, Tark. We gotta go find Jim Rook. This ain't no time to be fooling. Please, Tark, say something so I know you're okay. You're scaring me." But as he says this, we get a close-up of the panel of Tark's face, and it is covered with blood and lifeless. And when Tark doesn't respond to Boz, he doesn't know what to do, so he just takes off running, And the truck driver who was running up to the accident sees this and he yells out to Boz, "Hey, get your ass back here, you son of a bitch. We've got to get this guy to a hospital." And as we turn the page, we do see that it seems the driver did get Tark to a hospital because he is on an operating table. And I guess he wasn't completely dead, even though he looked really bad in the panels. And there's 3 nurses getting him set up for surgery, and one of them saying, "Still picking up a heartbeat, fractured hip and extensive cranial damage, punctured lungs filling up with blood. Who is this guy anyway?" And another nurse answers, "Road traffic accident. Driver's giving a statement to the cops. Reckon he's going to be picking skin and hair out of his radiator for weeks." And under their talking, we get some narration that says, "He can't give up now. Not when so many people are depending on him." And one of the nurses says, "What's up with the costume? Is he supposed to be some kind of superhero?" Then we see a doctor come in and look Tark over, and he says, "The anesthetic should be taking effect. He's fighting it." But I guess the doctor figures that Tark is under for sure because he picks up a scalpel as he stands above Tark, and Tark's narration says, "He's got to find Jim Rook. Boz isn't smart enough to do this on his own. The continent of Mira has been raped by the Warlocks, and Rook is the only man who can stop them. No matter how much it hurts, Tark can't let his people down. He must find the Nightmaster." Then we see Tark's hand shoot up and grab the hand of the surgeon that had the scalpel in it, and the surgeon yells out, "Ah!" as his hand gets crushed by the barbarian. And then Tark sits up and yells, "Where's Jim Rook?" And the surgeon yells, "Shit, my hand!" And then Tark leaps off the table and runs out of the room, and as he does, he yells, "I've got to find him. We're all dead unless I can bring him back." So as he rushes through the halls of the hospital, the narration says, "And so, Tiki Tarkopolis Trootrust, last of the tribe of Zaz, who hung from his belt the pelt of the Ice Witch and the cut throats of 1,000 put-ons, who sailed the molten sea in the face of a nuclear storm, dies on a polished floor under the ghost blue glare of fluorescent lights." And under this narration, we get a panel of Tark's body bleeding out on the polished white floor with a huge trail of blood behind him. Then we get a panel of outside the hospital, and we see Boz is outside waiting for him, and the narration says, "Outside, Boz cries in the rain and runs his fingers across the contours of Tark's helmet. He's never been much of a thinker, but one thing is suddenly blindingly obvious. He's on his own now." Then we turn the page and we cut to Swamp Thing in the swamp, and he's just sitting down relaxing on the water's edge. But also on the border of this page, there is what looks like a knight holding a flaming sword and covered in armor. And I don't actually think that he's there in the swamp in the shadows of this tree. I think it's just supposed to be like some artistic foreshadowing for the story, which we can also see on this page is called the Ace of Swords. So a Swamp Thing is sitting in the swamp, just enjoying the beauty of nature and the wildlife. A bird flies over and lands on his finger, and he says to the bird, "Hello, and how are you today? Feeling any better? I'm happy to see your appetite has returned. Did you notice the juicy earthworm crawling around inside my skull? I thought so. Go on then, help yourself." And as Swamp Thing stands up, the bird moves to his head to find that worm. And Swamp Thing's narration says, "There is nothing in my body which a doctor could describe as a human heart, and yet something stirs deep inside when I look at this world around me. Alec Holland may have burned to death more than 2 decades ago, but there is still a tiny part of him I refuse to bury with his bones." Then we see Swamp Thing bend down and pick up a small metal box that was on the ground next to him, and he continues saying, "His humanity, it must never be forgotten, and so I keep it safe in here." Then Swamp Thing bends down and puts the box on the ground like he's going to open it, but he hears a noise behind him, and as he looks to see what it is, we see a man with crocodile skin walk up behind him. And as Swamp Thing looks over his shoulder, he doesn't look particularly worried, and he thinks, "Gotham City's strange crocodile man has been circling me for hours. I think he wants to know what's in the box. The matter is also territorial. He's planned an assertion of his physical strength since the moment he arrived. He'll try to fight me soon. Will it be today?" And then Swamp Thing gives Killer Croc a challenging stare, and he holds Killer Croc's gaze for a while until Croc begins to turn and walk away. And Swamp Thing thinks, no, he isn't ready yet. Slouching off into the shadows, he looks around once and makes an unpleasant clicking noise as he disappears into his dark quarter of the swamp. Good. I don't want to see anyone. I just want to be left alone. Just me and my box. And as he says this, he opens the lid and looks into it. And of course, we don't see what's in the box yet. Then we cut back to New York City in front of a bar and grill restaurant. And from the outside, we can hear some dialogue that says, it's so weird to think I'm sitting here in a bar with Jim Rook, and you're like sipping a glass of iced tea. It's so civilized. I thought all rock stars were supposed to be alcoholics. Then we cut to the inside, and we see two people sitting at a table, a man and a woman, and the woman looks like she's normal, everyday, kind of 90s white lady, maybe in her 20s, and she's holding a doll in her hands. And the man is an older white gentleman who's wearing a hoodie and blue jeans, and he's also got long white hair, and he also has pointy ears, which is kind of different because I don't know if I called it out or not, but the barbarian and the halfling that are looking for a Jim Rook also have pointy ears. So in answer to her talking about all rock stars being alcoholics, Jim Rook says, are you kidding me? Booze equals MTV and all the other crap they want us to get hooked on. Its only purpose is to halt the thinking process. Why pay money for an addictive drug which rots your brain and makes you look like shit? Iced tea suits me fine. And the woman replies, a bar is a funny place to find a guy who hates drinking so much, Mr. Rook. And Rook says, this isn't a bar. It's an office. This is where people come to get advice and let me help them with their problems. I'm not a rock star. I'm an ex-rock star, dig? I left all that shit behind me. And then the woman looks down at her doll and begins to stroke its hair, and she says, well, whatever you are, I just wanted to say thanks for finding me an apartment. Hitching a ride to Manhattan was the smartest move I ever made. Gotham was such a dump. And upon hearing this, Rook gets a little smile on his face and he says, yeah, so now you've got your pad, you're going to need furniture. No sweat. I've got a friend with an old washing machine. He doesn't use any. And then Jim stops mid-sentence and then he says, oh shit. And the woman asks questioningly, Mr. Rook? And then Rook suddenly stands up to leave and he says, excuse me a minute, Maggie. I just saw someplace I used to know. Then he just takes off walking outside and Maggie runs after him saying, what did you say, Mr. Rook? I don't understand. But he just keeps walking across the street all the way to this store that says Oblivion Inc. on the glass. And as he stops and looks at it, he says, I know this place. I've been here before. And then Maggie, who's caught up to him now, says, sure you have. You live here. You've probably visited the shop 100 times. And he replies, you don't get it. This shop wasn't here yesterday or any other day. I mean, I've been here in my dreams. This is where I had my weirdest trip ever. Jesus, I thought I hallucinated the whole building, but I was wrong. Here it is, large as life. Funny, I never recognized it before. And Maggie asks, does it bring back any happy memories? And Rook replies, everything between 1968 and Reagan's inaugural speech is kind of hazy, but this is one trip I'll never forget. I'd take a look inside to check it out, but it looks like nobody's home. And then he gestures to a close sign on the window. And then Jim begins to stroll down the sidewalk, and as Maggie follows him, he says, man, that trip was some experience. I started in Oblivion Inc. and ended up in a fairyland. It was so vivid, you know? I mean, I could smell the place. I met a goblin and barbarians and all kinds of shit. It was like opening up Lord of the Rings and slipping between the words. My poor old lady was having flashbacks for months. And then Maggie asks, she left you, didn't she? And Rook replies, yeah, she did. Janet left me in 71. We were married 211 perfect days and one shitty night. And then Maggie says kind of flirtingly, I'd never dump someone like you. She must have been crazy. And Rook is kind of taken aback by this and he says, what? And Maggie lays it on a little thicker and says, do you want to sleep with me, Mr. Rook? I promise not to tell anyone. And Rook has like a confused, sad look on his face as he says, no, not really, Maggie. But she doesn't seem very dejected or anything. She just takes off down the sidewalk, waving back to him and saying, okay, see you later then. Don't forget to ask your friend about that washing machine you promised me. So it seems that maybe she was just a starstruck young woman who thought it might be fun to sleep with a rock star or something. Then we turn the page and we cut to later that day where Jim Rook is sitting in what I assume is his apartment, and he's looking pretty thoughtful and sad as he listens to some music on his record player. And the narration says, "He wrote this song for Janet on her 21st birthday. She said it was the coolest present ever. They used to sit around and get high, listening to it every night before they hit the floor and had sex until the sun came up. Everything was perfect, and then one day she called a cab and left. He probably wouldn't recognize her now. 5 presidents have come and gone since she packed her sports bag, but he was pretty sure she'd still be beautiful. Sometimes he thinks he sees her in the street. Neighbors said she left because he quit the band. It wasn't the fame she missed, it was the money, and Jim had given it all away. Rumor has it she married an accountant and moved to Florida, but Jim emphatically denies this. He refuses to accept that someone like Janet could ever be so shallow. Then we see Boz the halfling running down the street and stopping at a door and pushing the doorbell. Then we see Jim Rook look up at his door, and the narration says, "The doorbell rings. Jim sits up, and for a moment he feels his balls shrivel like canned prunes. The doorbell rings again, and every instinct begs him not to answer. Bolt the door, hide behind the sofa, do anything but answer it. As usual, Jim doesn't listen to anyone. So then we see Jim Rook stand up and walk to the door to answer it, and as he opens it, it doesn't seem like he recognizes Boz, and he says, 'Yeah, what do you want, kid?' And also, Boz doesn't seem to recognize him. He says, 'Where's Jim Rook? I gotta talk to him.' And then he pushes his way past Jim into the apartment, and he looks around and says, 'I know he's here someplace, because the traveler said so. I got to find him, mister. He's the only one who can help us now.' And a very confused Jim looks at Boz and says, 'What? Wait a minute, I'm Jim Rook. What the hell is this about? Who the hell are you?' And then Boz stops in his tracks and turns back and says, 'You're Jim Rook? Oh no, we're doomed.' And then he sits down on the floor and puts his head in his hands. Then we get to Swamp Thing back in the swamp, and it looks like he's still looking inside that box, but now he's just sitting on a large tree root that is in the water, and his narration says, 'It's easy to forget the small things in life when we're constantly faced with the bigger picture. Sitting here under a favorite tree puts everything into perspective. So much has happened recently, and greater changes lie ahead, but I know I will always be able to deal with them, so long as I never forget what I once had. I am the Swamp Thing, the Earth Elemental. Once I was just the guardian of the green, but now I have become something more. My encounter with the Parliament of Waves has given me new responsibilities. Now both the earth and the water of this world are mine to command. The sheer scale of what I am is only beginning to become clear to me. I have been chastised for clinging to my humanity in the past, for not embracing the amorality of nature with enthusiasm, but I have seen omens of what I may become if I cut myself off from my roots. I fear the consequences for mankind. After all, without our humanity, where are we?' Then we see Swamp Thing's thoughts are kind of cut off as he hears a noise behind him, and we see Killer Croc approach, and he asks, 'What's in the box?' Then we turn the page and we cut back to Jim Rook and Boz, and they're now in Rook's kitchen, and Rook is handing Boz a glass, and he says, 'Here, drink this. It's supposed to calm you down.' Although I admit, it never works for me when I get the shakes. I'd have made some herbal tea or something, but I gave my kettle to the family downstairs a couple of years ago. There's nothing else worth eating here except some old tofu sticks and a can of dried tomatoes if you're desperate.' And a very sad Boz stares at his glass, and he says, 'What's the point? We're goners. You were the only one who could beat them before, and now you're just a dumb old man. You can't fight nobody.' And then Jim turns to him and says, 'Chill out, big guy. Slow down and start at the beginning. Are you in some kind of trouble I should know about here, or what?' And Boz answers, 'We're all in trouble. Mira's been burned to the ground, and just about everyone I care about is dead. Even Tark, even he's dead. The Traveler sent us here because he said you still had the Nightmaster's sword. You are our last hope against them warlocks, and you can't even remember us." And at that, it seems like something's triggered in Jim's mind, like he begins to recollect something, and he says, "The warlocks? Wait a minute. Did you say warlocks? Oh, Jesus. Boz?" But then it seems like maybe Jim is trying to reject what he just thought, and he says, "Oh, Jesus, I'm having a flashback. I knew this would happen someday. The most I've done in 15 years is a little dope, and now I'm having a goddamn acid flashback." And then he waves at Boz and says, "Disappear, man. You don't scare me. I know you ain't real, so just fade, dig? You're just like that crazy shop I saw on the street, right?" And Boz replies, That's not true. I'm as real as anything else you got here in this pretty house. That old shop you spoke about? It's real too. That's how he was to get back to Mira once I found you." But Jim isn't really paying attention. He's just kind of walking around Boz thinking that he's a delusion. We actually see him go to a bookshelf and start looking through books about being a hippie. And he says to himself, "Acid flashbacks. Shit, I'm sure I've got a book on this someplace." Then we see Boz pull out a rock from underneath his cloak. And as he holds it up, he says, "You still got the sword, Jim. The Nightmaster's sword. That's how I managed to find you. I can feel it getting closer and closer every step I take in this direction. I know it's around here someplace." And then Boz walks over to the cabinets in the kitchen, and it's kind of like the rock is a homing beacon or something that's telling him where to go. And as he reaches for a cabinet door, Jim holds his head in his hands and he says, "Wake up, please, wake up. None of this stuff is happening. Not one iota of this bullshit is for real." But then we see Boz pull out a full-size sword from the cabinet, and he says, "What about this, Jim? Is this just another hallucination? This is the one thing them warlocks are scared of. The sword of the Nightmaster. You and your girlfriend beat them with it before." And at the mention of his girlfriend, Jim gets very mad and he says, "Bullshit! I was never the Nightmaster. It was all just a trip. Janet told me she bought that sword off some old beatnik. It's got nothing to do with warlocks." But Boz doesn't seem dissuaded and he says, "It should be on fire. The Nightmaster had a big flaming sword, Jim. What's the matter with it?" And this seems to irritate Jim even more, and he says, "There's nothing wrong with it. There's no such thing as magic swords, and no such place as Mira. Now get lost." But Boz doesn't move. He says to Jim walking away from him, "We can make her love you again." And this stops Jim in his tracks, and he says, "What?" And then Boz holds out the handle of the sword to Jim, and he says, "The traveler who sent me said he could bring Janet back, and everything in the world will be just like it used to be. He said you folks could be young again, too, if that's what you really wanted." And Jim asks, "Are you serious?" And Boz answers, "All you gotta do is fight the warlocks for us, Jim. They just conquered Mira, and now it's Erica they want to get their paws on. The Traveler says they're gonna steal the powers of an earth elemental and tear your world apart. You gotta stop them. You're the only hope we have left." Then we come back to Swamp Thing, and we are still at the moment where Killer Croc asked him what was in the box, and Swamp Thing looks kind of annoyed in his face, and his narration says, "Gotham's Crocodile Man is talking, but I'm not listening to what he's saying. His mannerisms suggest a primitive aggression, and it seems the attack he has been planning might perhaps be just moments away." Then Killer Croc says, "Are you deaf? I said, what's in the box?" But Swamp Thing doesn't answer, and his narration continues saying, "I find this distraction from my meditation somewhat tedious, but the situation must be dealt with promptly. The Parliament of Stones showed me a region beyond the green, which allows me access to any rock or mineral I wish to control. They call this place the Melt. However, I have since discovered a region even beyond there, and now I understand. These realms are just a glimpse of a bigger picture. The Parliament of Waves taught me how to find what I have called the Blue, a cool, wet place which allows me to manipulate water in any way I choose. The effects are devastating." And as Swamp Thing was thinking all this, we see behind Killer Croc something begin to move in the water, and defying gravity, a body begins to form and shape itself out of the water. And Killer Croc hears a splashing noise behind him, and as he turns, he sees whatever shape has formed, and he says, "Judas H. Priest!" Then we turn the page, and we see what he was looking at is water in the shape of Swamp Thing's body, and it punches Killer Croc in the face. And Swamp Thing's narration says, "First I bridged the gap between root and rock, and was fully rewarded with the full power of the earth. My next trial was developed by the Parliament of Waves, and in succeeding, I then became their elemental champion as well. Now, only 2 elements are beyond my control, but something is guiding me towards them. I know it's only a matter of time before fire and air are also within my power." And as Killer Croc flies backwards into the water from Swamp Thing's strike, we see more Swamp Thing bodies begin to form out of the water. And as Killer Croc recovers and stands up, these multiple Swamp Things surround him. And all of them begin punching Killer Croc. And obviously they're trying to make a point here because obviously Killer Croc is not the biggest villain ever, but Swamp Thing isn't even paying attention to this battle. All this thought narration is going on top of it. So Swamp Thing's not even thinking about this fight, and as they pummel Killer Croc, Swamp Thing's narration continues saying, "What looks out from behind the eyes I can feel watching me from the dark? Who are the 3 men who guided me on the first steps of my spiritual journey, and where are they leading me now?" And of course, the 3 men he's talking about are Senior Blake, Don Roberto, and the Mysterious Traveler, who, like he said, we haven't seen for a while. And his narration continues, "Is the ultimate purpose of my evolution supreme power over all the earth and control of its 4 basic elements? And if so, then what? Such power must be tempered with humanity. No matter what abilities I discover or how much power I accumulate, I must never forget what mankind means to me." And in the background of all these thoughts, we're seeing this epic fight between Killer Croc and all these water constructs. And of course, the constructs are winning because Killer Croc can't hurt them at all. But he's getting frustrated as he's swiping at them and the water's just falling apart and recreating itself. And he's yelling, "Where the hell are you going? Get back here! Come back and fight like a man!" And Swamp Thing's narration continues saying, "I can summon thunderstorms or droughts, raise tidal waves, or violently manipulate even the human bloodstream. But I value the contents of my secret box above all else. Nothing means more than my humanity." And as Swamp Thing's thoughts mention tidal waves, all of a sudden we do see a giant tidal wave coming, and Killer Croc hears it and he turns to see it. And it's almost like then he realizes that he is way over his head in this fight. Then we turn the page and we cut back to the Oblivion Inc. store where we see Jim Rook and Boz standing in front of it. And Boz is saying, "Here we are, Jim. Welcome to Oblivion Inc. Take a good look around you at the world you're leaving, because you might never come back." And Jim replies, "Shit happens, Boz. So what if it's locked? It was closed the other day when I passed. What if we can't get inside?" And Boz answers, "Oh, don't worry about that. All the clever stuff's been taken care of. The Traveler's been looking forward to meeting you for quite a while. Now, come on. Are you going first or am I?" And then almost as if he's getting cold feet, Jim Rook starts to pace around and he says, "Whoa, wait a minute. I'm sorry, Boz. I don't think I can go through with this right now." And Boz asks, "What do you mean, Jim? It's not like you can just turn around and walk away. We got nobody else to fight for us." And Jim replies, "It's just, Christ, it's just that the Warlocks might not have gotten any older, but I have. Boz, I'm an old man. I'm 53 years old. Shit, even this stupid sword doesn't work. What chance have I got against these bastards?" And Boz replies, "You got nothing here, Jim. I ain't the smartest guy in the world, but even I can see that your life's a mess. So what's to lose? We're offering you the chance to be with Janet again, just like a fairy tale." And Jim replies, "Boz, for Christ's sake." But just as he says that, all of a sudden, the sword is engulfed in flames. But like in a good way, because if you remember, it's supposed to be on fire. And not just that, but also Jim Rook looks down at his legs and arms and sees that he is now wearing the costume or armor of the Nightmaster, which is basically just a full suit covering from head to toe, And the only skin that you can see are his hands and his face, and the rest of his head is covered too. And in the art, it kind of just looks black, but I think it's supposed to be like chainmail or something. And he also has a very large red flowing cape. And Boz is super happy to see this transformation, and he says, "Come on, Jim, shake a leg and get moving. You look great. Kind of wrinkled and paunchy, but at least you look like the Nightmaster again. That should scare him." And as they walk into the front door of Oblivion Inc., Jim Rook says, "I feel like an asshole." And Boz says, "A what, Jim?" And Jim answers, "Forget it, Boz. It's not important." Then we come back to the swamp, and we see Killer Croc floating in the water in the aftermath of the tidal wave, and he is unconscious. And we see a lot of the plant life has also been ripped up from the ground and stuff from the tidal wave, but the tree that Swamp Thing was sitting on is still there, and he's still sitting on it looking at his box. And his narration says, "When he opens his eyes, the Crocodile Man will find himself some distance from where he was when the tidal wave hit him. Perhaps I should have subdued him with a small whirlpool instead. Not that it matters now. What's important is that he learned his place in the pecking order of the swamp. I doubt he'll be much trouble in the future. Exactly why he was so determined to examine the contents of my box, I do not understand. I open it one more time and take a look inside. Everything that keeps me sane in this world looks back at me in all its tiny beauty, and I feel a lump thicken in what I suppose I might call my throat." And then we see what's inside the box that he's been looking at for so long, and it's a little tiny round object in the bottom of the box. And his narration continues. "A button from Abby's denim blouse, the one she wore the day after we first kissed, as bright and polished as it must have looked on the day she bought it. I found it lying on the bottom of the swamp. Isn't it incredible?" And just as he thinks that, he hears a voice behind him say, "Alec?" And Swamp Thing's so stunned, he drops the box, and he turns with wide eyes, and he sees Abby standing there, and she says, "Shh, don't say anything." But Swamp Thing can't help himself. He stands up, and he turns, and he says, "Abby?" And then she walks towards him and looks into his eyes and says, "Please, don't ask me why I'm here." And then they embrace and look into each other's eyes, and that is where we leave it. Abby has returned, but we'll have to see for how long in the next issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And until next time, remember to stay swampy.